How is it possible that an official Star Wars game from one of the biggest and most successful game studios be dead less than a year after launch? When you say it out loud like that, it sounds crazy, but here we are. Star Wars Battlefront 2 released less than a year ago, and already it's becoming difficult to find a game in anything except its two largest modes, Galactic Assault and Starfighter Assault. If you're a fan of the smaller game types such as Strike or the quirky but hilariously enjoyable Ewok Hunt, then that's too bad, because unless you want to spend hours waiting in an empty lobby hoping it will fill up, you're out of luck. Granted, this may not be as big of an issue in the US or in Europe, but here in Australia, where the player base is significantly smaller, Battlefront 2's online lobbies have started looking like ghost towns. You might be thinking, well, that's Australia's problem, I can find games easy. And while that might be true now, it won't be for long. You see, small player bases like Australia act a bit like a canary in a coal mine when it comes to online communities. We notice the first warning signs of a drop in players because the pool of people to play with is so much smaller. When a big community with millions of users loses a couple 100,000 players, it may be easy not to notice. But when a community of only a couple 100,000 players loses the same amount, it has a pretty big impact. Of course, Australians, or as we like to call ourselves, Strayans, can play with people from other countries. But because of the difference in time zones, we often play when the majority of US or European players aren't online. In the 5 months since I've re-reviewed the game, and mostly had positive things to say about it I might add, it has been progressively getting harder and harder to find matches. At first I thought this might have been a matchmaking issue or some other problem isolated to Australia. Finding games quickly has always been wildly inconsistent, and Australia is no stranger to internet related problems. Some nights it's easy and you can party up with friends and find games in just about any mode. Other nights it's impossible, with Galactic Assault being the only option available and it being full of maxed out purple card tryhards. But as the months have rolled on, it's become increasingly harder to find populated lobbies, and that a lack of players is the likely culprit. Now, the reasons for Battlefront 2's failures have been well documented. It can pretty much be summed up in 3 words: loot boxes, progression, and EA. Okay, so technically that's 4, but my point is that Battlefront 2 has become the poster child for how to ruin what should have been a guaranteed success. Now, there are a few rays of hope on the horizon. The roadmap outlining what's ahead does sound promising, for example. Not only are DICE looking at adding various quality of life improvements such as balancing the matchmaking, it sounds like a proper expansion is planned too, with Geonosis and a big new game mode coming sometime in early 2019. An expansion of this size is something that the game hasn't seen since the last Jedi season back in December of 2017. This will undoubtedly bring back a large amount of players, but convincing those players to stick around will be the real challenge. If DICE don't address the large number of issues that the community have continuously raised, then those returning players will leave as quickly as they came back. The good news for DICE is that many of these issues should be relatively easy to fix, and we've already seen some of the more glaring problems such as matchmaking being looked at. Now, in addition to matchmaking, squads is another good example of something that players have been asking for since launch that wouldn't require much effort to implement. Without question, it should have been shipped with the game. It's an expected feature, particularly in a DICE game. But its inclusion is a positive change, not only in the way that it impacts gameplay, but also because these sorts of improvements show that the development team is listening to what people want.
I'm charging him. He's going down.
So why has DICE taken so long to fix outstanding problems such as the squad system? The simple answer is return on investment. I don't know for sure, but it seems likely that EA would be reluctant to spend money on development time that doesn't directly increase revenue. Expansions, new features, and cosmetic items are all easy to track in regards to profit. They either bring in new players or they convince existing players to spend more money. This doesn't necessarily make EA greedy, although I'm not saying that they aren't. What I am saying is this is a standard business practice. You don't spend money if it's not going to make money. It does make them pretty short-sighted though. To explain why fixing the base game before adding new content is important and how it can impact profit margins, I'm going to steal a story from Jared's Spool. Jared is a well-respected expert on usability and software design. His talk on fixing the fundamentals of an experience before adding delight is a perfect analogy for Battlefront 2. By the way, it's an excellent talk on UX design if you're ever in the mood. Anyway, I'll stick a link in the description. In 2009, Hyatt Hotels was struggling with very low customer satisfaction ratings. The CEO's strategy for combating this was to give staff at the hotel the power to perform random acts of kindness for guests. This could be anything from picking up their bar tab to treating a family to a free meal. The CEO's thinking was that by delighting guests at random, they would tell their friends about the amazing experiences they had, and this would improve customer satisfaction across the board. The problem was that this strategy didn't address what was causing the dissatisfaction in the first place. Poor quality food being served, faulty air conditioning, and even broken glass being left uncleaned were just some of the problems that weren't being solved. So these random acts of kindness intended to delight and potentially distract from the real problems didn't work, and the hotel's poor ratings remained. The point is that, aside from a free meal not being adequate compensation for glass in your foot, people won't be dazzled by shiny new things for long before all the old cracks and seams start to show again. DICE need to focus on fixing and balancing the base game and meeting some basic expectations before adding more bells and whistles to it. There's no point in adding General Grievous if only the hardcore players with maxed out purple cards will ever get to use him. There's no point in adding new modes when it's hard enough to find games in the existing lobbies. And adding new cosmetic items doesn't make any of the long-standing issues more palatable. The other thing to consider is that anyone picking up the game at this point will have to deal with players who have unlocked the best weapons, attachments, and abilities a long time ago. This is a problem that most competitive online games have, but Battlefront 2's lengthy weapon and top-tier card unlock requirements make the playing field heavily tipped in the favour of experienced players. The progression system overhaul went some ways into addressing this, but the game is far from accessible to new players. So where do we go to from here? Is it possible to turn things around and, dare I say it, make Battlefront 2 great again? Of course it is. Ubisoft have proven that the games as a service model can work when community feedback is taken on board and the title is supported long term. Rainbow Six Siege originally launched to underwhelming sales and a mixed reception. It too was criticised for its microtransactions, but over the next few years, through a combination of smart updates and supporting the community through events such as the esports scene, it's consistently built on its player base and now boasts over 30 million players. Incidentally, 2015's Battlefront came out the same year as Siege and comfortably beat it in regards to sales. But no one plays that game now because EA gave up on it a long time ago, and it seems like Battlefront 2 is destined to suffer the same fate. It's not a matter of if Battlefront 2 can be fixed, it's a matter of if it will be fixed, and my guess is that it won't. I think that SkillUp summarised it perfectly in his video about the Wilson loot box when he said, and I'm paraphrasing, EA isn't player focused or interested in making great games. EA is predominantly concerned with this. And despite the success that Ubisoft has had with the games as a service model, it's clear that EA has no desire to play the long game or make decisions that put the consumer first. Their refusal to back down on loot boxes in spite of everything that has transpired since the launch of Battlefront 2, even in the face of legal action, is proof enough of that. Battlefront 2 isn't a perfect game, but god damn it, when it works it can be fun. DICE is also a skilled development team, it's just a shame that they've been hamstrung by the way that EA allow them to operate. I'd like to say that everything is going to work out and that Battlefront 2 will rise again. But let's be honest, the games industry moves so fast and with so many other titles available, I can't see that happening. Battlefront 2 was supposed to be the game that redeemed the failures of the 2015 reboot, but instead it's failed even harder. If there is a third game in the works, then I have only one thing to say to EA. And rather than say it myself, I think it was perfectly summarised in the original trilogy.
Do or do not. There is no try.